I want to bring in NBC's Mike Memoli, who followed the Biden trial in Delaware. Matt Gorman is a Republican strategist, former communications director for the National Republican Congressional Committee, and former senior communications advisor for the Tim Scott campaign. Paul Butler is a former federal prosecutor, Georgetown law professor, and an MSNBC legal analyst. So, Matt, is this simply an inconvenience when it comes to Trump and Republican messaging, or is there something more serious, a bigger problem than that at play?
I don't think really much of it at all, because I don't think any votes were going to be changed. Just like I argued with when it came to the Trump verdict, that anything would be happening on the Hunter Biden verdict, right? Like votes we moved on the economy, on maybe abortion or immigration, depending on the left and the right. At the end of the day, a Hunter Biden verdict versus a Trump verdict is not going to move any substantial voters. So maybe there might be, some talking points might need to be updated, but it's not going to move or change any major narratives.
Well, Matt, Republicans may actually have two problems here, right? There's a sympathy factor. A lot of Americans have had a connection to people with addictions, and we've heard expressions that there is concern that this will maybe take some people who are in the middle and make them see Joe Biden in a more favorable light. And as the Wall Street Journal reported this week, a not insignificant portion of the base, the Republican base, are gun owners who see this as a Second Amendment issue. They believe Hunter Biden was actually unfairly prosecuted. So do Republicans go after Hunter potentially at their own peril?
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't think this was a case about addiction any more than technically the Trump case was about paying off a porn star, right? One is about lying on a federal form under penalty of perjury, and the other was about falsifying business records. And so, look, and also, Hunter is a 54-year-old adult. He's responsible for his actions, in this case, lying on that form.
But likability and trust do play into presidential elections.
Sure, but Hunter's not running for president, right? And I think
no, but his dad is, and the way his dad handled this, and as vis-a-vis the way that maybe some Republicans want to talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, look, after hearing kind of a lot of how the Biden team talks about it, hearing some of the kind of pictures, or seeing some of the pictures coming out the other day, look, I wouldn't be surprised if there was a commutation. I know he's ruled out a pardon. He did that last week in an interview with ABC. I wouldn't be surprised if he either goes back on the pardon promise or does some kind of commutation based off of kind of the sentiment we're hearing from the Biden team right now.
Mike, is there anything that you're hearing that would suggest that the president would go back on what he has said very clearly, both in writing and in public?
Well, in fact, Chris, I just have some new reporting in the last few minutes after talking to a White House official, because Karine Jean-Pierre, the White House press secretary, was asked this question about a commutation on Air Force One as the president is traveling to Italy, and she maybe created a little confusion. She said that she didn't have anything to say about that question. We know how quickly the president responded to that question about a pardon in that ABC News interview, but a White House official telling me just moments ago that any discussion of commuting this sentence is premature because, as this official points out, there is not even a sentencing date, let alone a sentence to commute. This official also pointed to the statement that was released in the president's name yesterday after we got that verdict, in which he said he would continue to respect the justice system as it moves forward. Now, that's important, but I think we also need to be realistic, Chris, to Matt's point about what might be different after Election Day, whether or not President Biden wins re-election. Either he'll be on his way out of office and looking at a potential new Trump administration coming in, or he'll be free of any potential future electoral consequences and may decide to do this. But I think that official is right that we are talking about a potential sentence that could be simply probation and not even jail time.
All right, so, Mike, I want to play with some Trump voters out in Pennsylvania told our NBC reporter about the Hunter Biden verdict. Take a listen.
God bless that man. He's been through an awful lot. I wish him well. I wish him well.
I think this country personally has bigger issues, but I'm glad that nobody's above the law. I'm glad that the juries have been doing their job.
At the same time, the NRCC is trying to fundraise off this verdict, selling Biden and Son shirts in, quote, jumpsuit orange. There you see the picture. It seems particularly odd, maybe, because that group is built to help Republicans in tough districts, including moderate districts. Is there a disconnect between what Republican lawmakers want to focus on and what Republican voters want to focus on?
Well, Chris, we often do
excuse me.
see this disconnect, this gap between what is used to potentially raise money and activate the base versus what is that money used to spend on when it comes to campaign advertising on the airwaves. And so I think in this case, we certainly see that this is a motivating factor for those base voters. But maybe when we look at what the Republicans are putting on the TV airwaves this fall, it's different. I do think it was significant, though, Chris, yesterday when not just the Biden campaign was hands off as it relates to this Hunter Biden trial, so was the Trump campaign. The topic of addiction was so part of the discussion throughout this trial, and the Biden campaign maintains it backfired when President Trump 4 years ago went after Hunter Biden in this way. And so I think you saw so quickly, though, after this verdict, that Republicans were eager to push the conversation forward to the next trial that's coming in September as it relates to tax evasion. This trial may get even more difficult as it relates to revealing more about the sources of income, questions about whether Hunter Biden was actively lobbying or courting foreign interests that could be more politically problematic for this campaign as it moves forward. And that's certainly where Republicans seem to want to put the focus yesterday.
Matt, again, I want to remind people you worked at the NRCC. Given the strategy that seems to be coming out of Donald Trump's campaign right now, which is different than it was in the previous campaign, keeping hands off on Hunter Biden, at least to the extent of not coming out, not being critical in the way that some folks, particularly on the far right, were yesterday. Would you have argued against those T-shirts?
No, because I think Mike put it pretty well, right? And on one hand, that is the purpose of that is to raise money, to energize the base. Clearly, we'll do that. But I think as you'll see when ads come out, and I think a couple more months from the NRCC and other entities, they're not going to be talking about Hunter Biden when it comes to the ads. They're going to, again, economy, immigration, crime, and the like. And so I think one is to make sure the coffers are filled. And then when they deplete the coffers through ads, they'll be talking about issues that the more general public independents will focus on.
Let me go back to the trial, if I can, Paul, because there was an interesting article in USA Today which talked to several jurors. One called the case heart-wrenching. Another said she felt this was a waste of taxpayer dollars, but that they followed what the jury instructions were and they voted guilty. But she asked this question: why couldn't they just fine him? What's the answer in your mind? And I guess maybe as an extension of that, you do wonder, should, for example, after the election, assuming he wins, Joe Biden decide on a commutation, maybe most of the American public would actually think, you know what, that's okay.
Yeah, so why couldn't they just fine him? They could, or they could not have charged him at all. The reason they did charge him is because his name is Hunter Biden. He's been charged with crimes that few people get prosecuted for. Every year, millions of people fill out the same ATF form to purchase a firearm. Only about 300 people a year get prosecuted for lying on that form. Prosecutors only bring a case typically if the gun is used in a crime. Hunter just possessed that gun for 11 days. It was never even loaded, and it was in a lockbox for 10 of those days. And Chris, the same thing is true with the tax charges. Most of us know people who don't pay their taxes for a while. And yes, it's a crime, but usually it's handled by the IRS as a civil matter. So Hunter is actually being treated worse. And for that reason, I think there's a good argument to be made for a pardon or a commutation of the sentence if he's sentenced to a period of incarceration. President Biden could, but at least with regard to the pardon, he says he won't. And you could contrast that approach with Donald Trump and how he used his pardon power to help people who were close to him, like Steve Bannon, Paul Manafort, and Roger Stone. So I think it's hard on these facts to say it's Democrats who are weaponizing the Department of Justice.
Let me ask you quickly. Donald Trump has been masterful at delaying his other 3 criminal trials. None of them look now like they're going to be before the election. Is there a way for Hunter Biden to delay his tax trial that you see? Or do you think there's any likelihood that there could be a plea deal?
I think it's extremely unlikely to be delayed. It's already been delayed once because the lawyer for the president's son said that he needed more time to prepare for Hunter's tax trial. it couldn't be too close to the gun form trial. I think there's an extremely strong case for a plea bargain, just like Hunter didn't have an obvious defense in the gun form trial. He doesn't have an obvious defense in the tax case. And as Mike mentioned, if this case goes to trial, the details that come out are likely to be even more salacious than in the gun form trial. The indictment talks about, rather than spending the money on his taxes, Hunter used this money for sex workers, for fancy cars and fancy hotel stays. So again, if this trial happens 2 months before the election, I think there are going to be political concerns for the president. Plus, if he goes to trial and is convicted in the tax case, he could get more time based on his prior conviction for the gun form case. So, Chris, you could be sure that the Hunter's defense team is urging him to consider a plea bargain so this tax case does not go to trial 2 months before the election.